You cannot get many scenes as dramatic as this one you see in the photograph. Not even in a movie. Only that this was not a movie. This actually happened right here in Kenya. In the photograph, you can see some men in the foreground going for their guns. Those men belong to the security detail of the President of the Republic of Kenya. If you look closer to the camera, there's one of the security people who has already drawn their gun and is already looking in the direction where he's about to fire shots. If you follow the arrow leads right up to the first president of Kenya, Mzee Jomo Kenyatta. He's sandwiched between some rather tall security people, his own security people. This dramatic scene took place in Kisumu on October 25th, 1969. But let's back up a little so that we understand the background or what led to this particular dramatic scene. The year was 1969. It was a general election year, just like 2017 is. And by the time this scene was happening on October 25th, the year had already been very, very dramatic. It had started with the assassination of a cabinet minister, actually the cabinet minister for foreign affairs, a Mr. Agwings Kodek, who died in a very mysterious supposed road accident. This road accident, in quotes, happened at the junction of what we know today as Agwings Kodek Road, yes, named after him, and Wood Avenue. Those who know the Kilimani area well will know this particular area. Mr. Kodek was a very interesting person. He was actually the first black Kenyan, African Kenyan, to qualify as a lawyer. And one of the big challenges he had was how to get back into the country with his wife. You see, he was married to a white woman, and in those days, it was a criminal offense to kiss a white woman, let alone cohabit or have sex with her. In fact, having sex with white women was an offense considered, where you'd get capital punishment for. Anyway, the other person who was assassinated was one Tom Mboya, who was assassinated on July 5th of that year. So already you can see the year had been very, very eventful, with very many tragic things happening, which were to culminate in this even more tragic incident that you see portrayed in this photograph, taken moments before the security detail of the president opened fire on the crowd. The reason why the president of Kenya was in Kisumu when this happened was to open the Russia Hospital. The Russia Hospital, as it used to be called, is a hospital which was built by the Russians through their point man, Jaramogi Oginga Odinga, that's father of Raila. And Kenyatta was here to open the hospital in a bid to popularize himself in this area, because as president of Kenya, he believed that there was no way in the country he would fail to get support. And so that's why Jomo was here today on this particular very sad, fateful day, when his security detail opened fire on the crowd. On that same day, there was a confrontation between Jomo Kenyatta and Jaramogi Oginga Odinga. You can see in the photograph, there is Jomo Kenyatta and is appearing to be shaking hands with the Jaramogi Oginga Odinga, who has his back to the camera in this photograph. Actually, it appears to be shaking hands because you can see around, there appears to be a lot of tension. You can even see that in the photograph. Towards the left, you'll be able to identify Biu Koinange, somebody who's very close to the president, a member of the kitchen cabinet, or the so-called Kiambu Mafia. Next to Jomo, you'll also be able to identify the late Njoroge Mungai, who again was a very prominent member of the kitchen cabinet. And you can see from Njoroge Mungai's expression that this is not a friendly greeting, all is well situation. That is very clear from his expression. And Mbuyu Koinange on the other side appears to be like he's mocking Jaramogi or something like that. Just look at the photograph carefully, because I can assure you on that day, even from eyewitnesses, all was not well. After this confrontation, or after this greeting, there was yet another confrontation when the president made a speech which was captured on VOK, KBC, those days it was called Voice of Kenya, radio, where he was talking and his former vice president, Jaramogi Oginga Odinga, was talking back to him. Members of my club 1999 if they look in the inbox, will see a full reproduction of that speech, including how Jaramogi was replying back. But maybe just to summarize it for the rest of you. In that speech, Jomo started with very strong abusive words. Yeah? Went something like this. Kitu gani hii KPU? Hapana sema dume dume. Kuma za mama zenyu. Dume dume. I'm sorry. I will not be able to translate that last part of my words because of the good upbringing I got from my mother. Anyway, it was very, very, very abusive. And yet it was in the same speech that Jomo used the words, sababu hata ndugu yangu mwenyewe sikumpenda kama wewe. Sikumpenda ndugu yangu kama wewe. That is referring to Jaramogi Oginga Odinga. Now those who have read my book, Dark Secrets of the Kenyan Presidency, will know that Jomo had only one brother. And this brother, his late mother died giving birth to that brother of his. And Jomo started looking after that kid brother of his when he was also a kid himself, barely 6 years old, 6-7 years old. Okay? So again, this is a resource that members of my club 1999 can be able to easily get so that they understand the whole context of this situation. Actually, Jaramogi had done a lot more for Jomo than most people realize. Kenya was on its way to get independence, and the front runners for the presidency at that time were Jaramogi himself and a rather young man called Tom Mboya. Now it is Jaramogi who stood up in the Leko, the parliament of those days, and declared and said, we Africans do not want independence without the release of Jomo Kenyatta. And it was that statement that led to a chain of events that led to the release of Jomo and to his ascendancy and to his ascending into the presidency. So in other words, Jaramogi, if I was to translate into today's jargon, Jaramogi said Jomo tosha, the way Raila said Kibaki tosha. Okay? So they were rather close, and Jomo was rather fond of him. But on this day, he was very, very upset. Now, it is also the same day that Jomo said, kama ungekuwa rafiki yangu, ningekusiaga kama unga leo. Roughly translated that he would have grinded him like maize flour if he wasn't his friend. Very, very dramatic. Now, that full speech is available to my members of my club 1999. Anyway, back to that horrible scene that we started with. These confrontations all culminated in that particular confrontation where Jomo, on trying to address, on continuing to address a crowd, ended up in a situation whereby somebody threw a chair. Now the chair did not get to Jomo because one of his security detail caught it in midair. But that's when the fracas broke out. That's when this particular scene you're seeing on this photograph started unraveling and unfolding. And the security detail, feeling that there was so much hostility towards the president and feeling that the president was being endangered, fired into the crowd. The president was quickly hurried into his car, and the car sped off. Now the interesting thing, even as the car speeded away from Kisumu, the firing continued, and several passers-by are said to have been shot. It's not clear whether the security people felt those passers-by were a threat to the president. I leave that because I don't want to speculate, but you can make your own conclusion about that. Now let's look at stuff that you'll not read in any history book, but stuff that is absolutely true, facts. Before that trip, before that fateful day of October 25th, a close aide of Jaramogi Oginga Odinga, somebody called Odinge Odera, had warned Jaramogi not to travel to Kisumu because there would be trouble. Now, where had he gotten his information from? He had a friend who worked with the special branch, the NIS of those days. It used to be called the special branch, the intelligence service, who had warned him that there's going to be trouble in Kisumu. Now, how would they have known there's going to be trouble in Kisumu? Just hold that thought for a minute. Jaramogi ignored it and insisted that since the president was going to be there, he had to be there. So he traveled and went to Kisumu. Odinge Odera himself took the advice, knowing that his information was credible, he stayed in Nairobi. He did not dare travel to Kisumu for that event. But still, it didn't stop him from getting arrested together with the other Kenya People's Union, KPU, political party members later. But that is a story for another day. Now, what I'm trying to say is that the whole situation, everything that happened in Kisumu, must have been stage managed. Because if you look at the events that followed that, the KPU was banned, Jaramogi was taken and arrested, and shortly after that, on 30th October 1969, Kenya became a de facto one-party state because the Kenya People's Union was banned. So going into the election of that year, there was only one party participating in that election, and that is KANU. That was KANU, rather. So, again, something else interesting that came from this incident is that clearly it must have appeared to the intelligence community at that time that the Luo community was a threat to the presidency. It was a threat to the security of the state. Now, if you've been reading Kumekucha, you'll know that a threat to the security of the state is actually a threat to the presidency. It's the same thing, at least in Kenya. And what happened from there is that it became very difficult, even for members of the Luo community, to access government health facilities. In fact, there are records of some who had to change their names and pretend they were another tribe in order to get some vital services. And of course, Jomo never visited Kisumu again. But even more important, there was a very deliberate action, there was a very deliberate policy of propaganda against the Luo community. Hawa watu watairi, hawa watu ni wachafu, hawa watu ni kurusha mawe, and so on and so forth. So what happened is that as children grew up, they were sucked into this propaganda. And this is the same propaganda that we have to this day, whereby people can actually stand up and say that a Luo cannot be president. Now, those who have been following me and following my recordings and my writings will know that I am not a CORD supporter, and I'm not a NASA supporter. In fact, I believe according to me, the political class are all the same. However, I'm not talking politics here. I'm talking about a tribe, a single tribe in Kenya, which is looked upon by other tribes as inferior. Yeah? That's what I'm talking about. And this whole incident started as government propaganda. And this whole thing was a political thing in order to isolate the Luo community and make sure they're not a threat to the security of the state. Now, I know this is controversial, and I know many of you readers will not, many of you people listening to this recording will not agree with me. I know many others will strongly agree with me, but that's not my point, and I'm not looking for support here. What I'm looking for here is to be able to record the truth, what really happened, how tribalism, the seeds of tribalism were planted in this country, so that they're so strong today that even a writer or somebody doing a recording like this one I'm doing cannot be able to say what they need to say. They cannot be able to comment without somebody trying to brand them a member of this side or favoring that side or favoring the other. And this happens both sides. There's no side which is not guilty. All of us are tribalists. Because had we not been tribalists, we'd be able to call our leaders to account. Because leaders on both sides of the political divide have a history of corruption. In fact, I dare say the people on the CORD side, the few chances they've had in government, have been even more corrupt than the people we have in Jubilee. That's a fact. Look at the records. Just look at the records. I don't want to go into details because I don't have the time here, and we have Mr. Google. These are details you can easily get in a flash online and find out. The long and short of it is that all our political class are corrupt. And even CORD, in wanting power, are not going to be any different than Jubilee. In fact, my guess is they could be much worse. But what I'm dealing with here is the monster called tribalism. That monster was birthed that day in October 25th, 1969. Because if Tom Mboya could get elected by an electorate mostly made up of Kikuyus in 1957 rather, what happened, or what has happened, that in 2017, things have changed so much that a member of tribe X cannot get elected in an area where majority of the voters are tribe Y? What happened to our country? This is something we need to address urgently, because if we do not address it urgently, this tribalism monster is going to swallow all of us. Thank you, my fellow Kenyans. I hope you'll take this recording and think deeply about it. Don't waste so much time branding me. Don't care which side I'm on or start thinking what side I'm on. Try to figure out something. Try and figure out how we can deal with this tribal monster before it consumes our country. Thanks very much. This is Chris Kumekucha. Bye.